Okay, spring is here. Quarter one is behind us.
Wow.
And somehow nothing's really happened since last time we talked. So this is going to be really simple, boring sort of periods.
And very easy to make our prediction based on what is going on in the world around us.
First things first, Kyle here, got Gabs. We co-lead the office together. We have David and Laura, our qualifying brokers. And today we're going to touch on a number of topics. We have kind of a lot to cover. But first, I want to talk about our Española Humane drive, which is going on right now in the month of April. And so come by our office and drop off donations for kitties and puppies. It's that time of year where they get flooded with a bunch of younglings.
Yeah.
And so we're here to support them. And so come by. We're actually competing between cats and dogs this year.
We are. And cats have a small lead
Ooh,
right now. So
that's
anything can happen.
Yeah, anything can happen. So please come on by, and then we'll have an adoption event May 10th, I believe.
Yes.
Here at the office.
Excited.
So, yeah, you can bring one home even. All right. Well, let's talk about real estate.
Please.
General residential market, first quarter here in Santa Fe. Strong?
Amazingly
Very
strong. Surprisingly strong. I think the strongest quarter we've had since the years of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. We ended last year with some momentum, and it carried all the way through winter into the first quarter of this year, which had more sales, more activity, I think most of us ever expected.
Yeah, definitely.
And then what's going on with the transactions themselves? Because I get a sense that they're not behaving in the same way.
To an extent, I hate to give this answer, but yes and no. Both January and February were fairly normal, the kind of activity we would typically see.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happened in March that just skyrocketed the activity.
Mm-hmm.
We saw a ton of transaction happening. We saw kind of an uptick in terminations, but that's expected with the rise in activity. So it was nothing really out of the ordinary, but it was definitely a much busier March than we're used to seeing.
Well, and in March, though, I feel like I saw a number of transactions that had either extensions or a lot of negotiations. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what we have noticed, so typically in my realm, we pay attention to terminations because that can be an indicator for us
Mm-hmm.
if the market's starting to take a bit of a turn, right? That's kind of like the yellow flag. Let's pay attention to what's going on. So nothing really rose any concerns for me in that realm. But what we did see, which is a little atypical, were a lot more extensions on transactions. And so what that's telling us is that we do have serious buyers. They're not getting, scared and running off.
Yep.
But they are really taking their time and doing their due diligence to make sure that they know what they're getting into.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're definitely taking their time, but they're real buyers.
Sounds like a lot more negotiation over inspection issues, presumably.
Most of the time, that's what you see. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think buyers are doing more inspections. They're being a little more careful because they're realizing they want the house. They're realizing that interest rates maybe aren't going to come down, so there's no need to wait for that to happen.
Right.
And so yeah, they're getting more serious. I also think sellers are realizing that they really need to negotiate too. Price it right to begin with, but then be prepared to be asked for concessions.
So do you think we're still in more of a seller's market, or where do you see that balancing?
Well, I think inventory is increasing.
It's gone up 20%
Yeah.
since last year. That's a big number.
Which is, heading more towards a buyer's market, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we're heading for a more balanced market.
Mm-hmm.
I would make the argument. I think we're actually in a much more balanced market overall. I'm looking at the inventory numbers, and year over year we're up substantially.
Yes.
And so there's more options on the market, and so buyers have a little bit of extra leeway to shop around, and they aren't being pushed into a corner anymore. And so I would expect that we're going to continue to see that happen, where people negotiate and get it to the closing table after maybe some back and forth.
And that's actually the important piece that you just said is they're taking their time, extending, and still getting to the closing table.
Right.
I think extensions sometimes can scare people, but they are still making it all the way through the transaction. So that's a key point that I just wanted to highlight.
And one thing that's also interesting is we've seen a narrowing between what people are asking and what they're selling for. And so there's historically in the last couple of years, there's been a pretty substantial gap between sellers and buyers in that regard. that has narrowed. And so to your point, Laura, I do think people, sellers in particular, are starting to warm up to the idea that, especially with more competition in the inventory side of things, that they have to be more serious and cautious about pricing and maybe not shoot for the moon.
Yeah. Yes, I think we're seeing that. I think they're realizing the pandemic is over. Time to get real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So coupled with the increase in inventory of 20%, I think we've seen a significant increase in sales, not by a 20% factor, but I think that comes in the realm of 12 to 15% more transactions.
Yep. Yeah. And so, this gets back to the balance. Like we're hitting the numbers now of where the amount of options in inventory is equal to what they consider a healthy market. And so we've kind of re-entered that zone, and oddly, or not oddly, depending on how you look at it, pricing really hasn't been affected at all. In fact, pricing's fairly flat. And if you look the past year or so, even price per square foot overall has remained steady. It's just coasting. It's not going up or down. It's just pretty much flat. And so from a pricing standpoint, with inventory coming in, increased number of sales, we're reaching that stasis.
So would you say that the market is truly flat in terms of appreciation and value? I was thinking it was still moving up a little bit.
It's hard because doing month over month is too much variation or giving a true average. Now, if I do a true average for Santa Fe County over the past year, starting today, we're only looking at about 1.5% overall. So appreciation. Right. Yeah. So appreciation isn't nearly as aggressive as it used to be overall. Now, specific areas, we've seen serious appreciation. A lot of them are on the outskirts of town. So like the New Mexico 14 area, Poake, things like that. You're seeing more appreciation. And I think that's just an effect of people getting pushed out of town looking for other opportunities.
So when we talk about the luxury market, I think what we're seeing is more activity, a lot more activity, particularly in the $1 to $3 million range. A lot of pressure there. I think we're seeing more competitive offer situations. People had gotten away where they thought there were not going to be in a competitive bid situation in that price range, but now we're seeing that fairly regularly.
Yeah, and there's good inventory in that market too, right? Like if you look at absorption rate, number of sales versus inventory, we're still looking at a pretty significant amount of opportunity there. So, buyers, again, they aren't being forced into anything, though the right property comes up and all of a sudden, like, it feels like people come out of the woodwork and it's like, oh, this one.
Right. Yeah. If it's your historic core East Side, a lovely property, even something that needs to get remodeled, there's going to be a lot of activity and multiple offers.
It is extremely home specific, though.
Yes.
Extremely. I mean, we've talked before about price per square foot. And, we're seeing a lot of people pushing the $900,000 price per square foot. But on average, we're still seeing about $7,000.
Well, and the higher price per square foot works better in town on the east side. If you get out into, Las Campanas, the La Tierra area, the Northwest Quadrant, you got to be careful, because you've got bigger homes there and you just don't get as much per square foot when you have more square footage.
Right.
So it's, you can't use the same rubric there.
Although we're now starting to see some outline sales in those areas that are approaching that $900 and $1,000 per square foot range.
Yeah. I mean, this comes back to, it's very home specific, very street specific, very it's very hyper local. And I think that's where a potential seller needs to flip it on its head and say, okay, I'm a buyer now, and shop around and imagine you're looking for a property similar to yours and figure out where your competition is. Someone looking for that home in Las Campanas might also be interested in something that's, maybe on Cruz Blanca or whatever.
Sure.
And so, it's not as cut and dry as people want it to be. And so it's really important to take your time and do that CMA carefully.
I think one of the other changes we're seeing in the luxury market is we're seeing more people coming in who are buying a larger primary residence, whereas before that buyer would have been shopping for a second or third home in Santa Fe. And when they want a primary residence, that's when they want something that is much larger.
And we're also seeing where people want either casitas or auxiliary sort of opportunities for either hosting or family and things like that. And so that's a big selling point on those larger end properties, is making sure that there's places for others to stay. it's not just for hosting; it's for long-term hosting.
Yeah.
That's been and
A place for mom.
not just an event or something, but it's a place to bring people in, and we're seeing that a lot more common where that's a question coming up.
Well, in those transactions, what you're also seeing is the buyer thinks of the house that they're buying as a reflection of them. And that's really important in the luxury market.
Yeah.
New construction has been an interesting field to watch over the past couple of years. Construction costs were up during the pandemic, so we didn't see as much of it. Then construction picked up. And now with the volatility in the market, and we don't know what the supply chains are going to look like. We don't know what material costs are going to be. I think people are starting to shy away from that.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things to watch out for in new construction, starting with obviously costs. And so I think you want to be careful looking at a contract to see what the restrictions are and what the builder is allowing himself.
Yeah, trying to figure out how a builder can deliver a product based on a certain price when he doesn't know what the cost of the lumber is going to be and the plumbing supplies and all these things. This is going to throw a real wrench in that custom market, particularly.
Yeah.
And you gotta understand that from the builder's standpoint, but still, as a buyer, you want to be careful with that. I think builders might start to be doing, wanting to see more cost plus contracts, which is a little risky for a buyer. It's a lot risky for a buyer.
And very difficult if they're trying to secure any financing.
Exactly. Right. I think part of the appeal, since you mentioned financing to new construction, is that sometimes they have in-home lending, which will give you a lower interest rate.
The national builders.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks. And so there's, you gotta weigh those and figure out, what's going to work best for you as a buyer.
I think the irony there is last time we were sitting here talking about this, it was like, hey, new construction is a great option. You might get a better term, get a new property, but here we are.
And that goes to show how quickly it's changed, right? So this is just kind of the state of the market that we're in right now. Is it can change from even day to day is what we're seeing. So we actually did have a couple attorneys in, I think it was either last week or 2 weeks ago, from Jones and Richter, who talked about this very topic. And they, the costs they could potentially go up. There's a lot of uncertainty now with building, and they were gracious enough to offer their help in reviewing builder contracts, because I think we all know that those contracts tend to be heavily in favor of the builder. So it's important for buyers right now. You want to act quickly, but you also want to know what you're getting into, right? So have somebody look at that contract and make sure you know all of those terms and deadlines and what you're responsible for before you get into a sticky situation.
With the uncertainty in the market for cost of construction, I've got to believe that's going to have a real damaging effect on the sale of vacant land. That's going to become more challenging.
It's very possible. Yeah. And, the trickle down effects, you're talking about like lumber. Lumber is a good example. We get most of it from Canada, right? And then appliances, most come from Asia. And so like all these markets that typically we don't think about in our little home here in Santa Fe, they do have a ripple effect. And so it's something to pay close attention to. And to echo your point, Gaps, and this goes for any property, but particularly new construction, do your homework up front, right? Really understand the terms and get it reviewed. A couple $100 on the front end might save you thousands of dollars on the back end. So, it's a good time to really practice patience and due diligence, but being able to act quickly.
Yeah, attorney review will be very important going forward, I think. And just another little aside on new construction, don't be afraid to get an inspection. Builders will try and discourage that because there's a warranty. But for $500, $600, $700, get an inspection.
Absolutely.
And don't feel like you have to rush through it too. Take your time. Check every cabinet, every switch. Take your time. Do your due diligence.
Well, let's talk about the big elephant in the room, which is whatever's happening out there. I don't even know how to describe it. Right? We're seeing fairly unprecedented stock market volatility.
Yes.
Bonds have been moving quite a bit, and especially in the last 48 hours. It's something I'm watching closely right now. And then obviously tariffs have an impact on goods coming in and the pricing on that. How do we see this affecting real estate?
Wow. Can we really avoid it? I mean, if you look nationally, consumer confidence has dropped dramatically.
Yeah.
When that happened before, we clearly had a significant impact on our local real estate market. What's interesting to me is, despite that, we're not seeing very many transactions terminate, even in the last 2 to 3 weeks when this really started.
Right.
Yes, we've had a few there. We've had some stories about, oh my gosh, my stock market portfolio just tanked and I don't have my down payment anymore. But by and large, we're seeing buyers stick with the transaction because they want to get it closed.
Yeah.
Maybe it's moving towards security for them.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people see Santa Fe and similar locales as a safe haven.
Mm-hmm.
We're not as pricey as a lot of the coasts, and so it's a good place to park money. Real estate is maybe being seen as a safer place to park some investing money than the stock market. So I think that we will start to see some of that.
Yeah, and to your point, so I actually went back and was doing some research on other similar events, and I say similar because I don't think it's quite the same.
Nothing's like the
As close as you can get.
As close as I can get. Yeah. So one that sticks out in particular to me is Black Monday back in 1981. That stock market correction and just the sort of economic ripples that came from that are not too dissimilar to what we're experiencing like the past 2 weeks here. And what's fascinating is you saw much safer investments grow. And I wouldn't be surprised if real estate continues to perform strongly as people are looking for more safe havens, as you pointed out, for the funds. And so gold is a good example, right? We saw gold go up. Gold is continuing to go up like as we speak. And as people are pulling money out of the market, they're looking for a place to park it. Our secondary markets like ours, like we aren't typically a primary market.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary markets as ours tend to perform better than the national average. And so the question moving forward is, does this have an impact on real estate? And the answer is pretty fuzzy. Like there is no historical narrative that I can point to that says stock market volatility equals negative results in the real estate market. There just isn't a narrative for that outside of 2008, but that was a whole, that's a whole different disaster, right? And so I just want to point that out is, I feel strongly that we're probably going to see more cash coming in, particularly on the high end, discretionary money, right? And entering our market. And so those waiting for the bottom to fall out and try to time the market in terms of purchasing, good luck. Like,
right.
I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, and that's what we're seeing in our numbers too, right? Is looking at the projections for this month and for next month, we're not showing any signs of slowing down.
So even in the last 2 weeks, Gabs, in terms of new transactions, new listings, and terminations, you're not noticing a substantial difference.
No, but I tell you what, our TC's hair's on fire with all the activity they're getting. So, but no, I mean, we're seeing a normal churn of terminations, a lot of activity with transactions going under contract, a lot of extensions. So there's still a lot of properties to.
Seems to me like despite the fact that consumer confidence has really dropped a lot nationally, locally with respect to our real estate market, it is still very strong.
Very strong.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, in some ways that's kind of bad news for locals that were hoping for pricing to cool off, right? That hasn't really happened. But the good news there is we are seeing more inventory. We are seeing more new builds that have been in the works the last couple of years come to light. And so, will this have any sort of effect on pricing? Possibly, we'll see, but trying to time things right now is borderline impossible. So if you somehow smarter than Buffett and everyone else out there, like, let me know, we'll hire you.
Yes.
But
make a guest appearance.
Right. Please do. But it's just one of those things where it's, as we talked about before, do your homework up front, be prepared to act quickly, and do your due diligence.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to avoid doing any predictions.
Really?
Well, listen, you have
my crystal ball back here.
There, yeah. I have my magic 8-ball downstairs. It's probably about as accurate as anything I could say. But let's just take a step back. In this moment, advice, right? What's your advice, Laura, for buyers?
Be careful. Don't feel rushed. There is inventory out there. Sometimes you'll have to compete. Do that carefully. Get your inspections. line up your financing. Just, be ready to go. You don't have to rush it.
Always good advice, but right now with options on the table, absolutely.
Yeah.
Be patient, right? Gabs, sellers.
A lot of sellers still like to test the market and try and get that higher price. I would say
They really
they
do.
really do. Yeah, they really do. And I would probably say now is not really the time for that. You want to really make sure that you price your property well, so that you can attract a lot of attention. And sometimes that will drive it up a little bit more. I would say no harm in a pre-listing inspection so that you know any issues with the property before you get into a transaction.
Good idea.
And limit the surprises and be willing and ready to negotiate because, buyers are squeezed on what they can pay right now. And they're clearly doing their due diligence. So be ready for those conversations and maybe be willing to work together through the process a little bit more.
Yeah.
One of the topics that has come up in some of our internal meetings with respect to advising sellers is to be able to think about their house and look at it through the eyes of a buyer.
Right.
They really have to understand how the buyer is going to think about that house. Is it a reflection of them? How does it compare with the competition? What else is out there? And when you get a good understanding of how a buyer views the property, then you're on target for a transaction.
Yep. Well, and to that point, what's your advice to brokers out there?
My advice to brokers is to really do their homework. And in a volatile market like this, particularly pay attention to the most recent transactions. Many times I see CMAs, a comparative market analysis that goes back 6 months or a year. I want to focus on what has happened literally in the last 30 days.
Yeah.
I want to look at the competitive transactions and properties. What's under contract that hasn't closed yet? What level of activity was that property receiving from the buyer's market? There's valuable information in there to discern. Takes a little more investigation, more phone calls, more digging, but that's important to do.
Yeah. Do your homework up front. That's sort of the message right now. Is
Be proactive.
Yeah. Yeah. And to echo your comments on the marketing side, because there's more inventory, stop rushing trying to get your home to market. Get it to market correctly the first time. That's that's pricing, that's photography, that's how it's staged or how you remove clutter and prepare the home, pre-inspection, all that stuff. Do it ahead of time. There's no advantage to running into it right now. And so yeah, good advice, David. Well, I'm sure by the time we film the next one of these, we'll be singing a different tune.
Yes.
Possibly, but at the end of the day, in a secondary resort to some extent market as ours, real estate continues to perform strongly.
It's very strong. Despite everything out there, I'm very optimistic.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think I share that, but with a
cautiously optimistic.
With an asterisk. Read the fine print.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
But so in 90 days we'll come back and we'll film another one of these and we'll see what happens.
Who knows?
Hey, Christy.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Yes.